Welcome back to Every Naval Battle in History. In Episode 7, we'll tackle the first battle at sea after the end of the Ionian Revolt, Artemisium. Artemisium represents a classic of naval history. The outcome appears completely different depending on what conditions you consider victory to rest. Who lost the most ships? Who retreated? Who achieved their objectives in engaging in the battle? Generally speaking, armies and navies don't engage in battles they don't think they can win. But when the definition of victory is mismatched, we can get battles like this one. The idea that both sides won is a constant of war at sea from ancient times to the 20th century. But first, some history. In previous episodes, we've tackled how the Ionian cities revolting against Persia had led to a combined Athenian-Ionian army burning down the Persian city of Sardis. Imagine if Oregon tried to secede from the US and the North Koreans burned down Los Angeles to support them. Now you've got a sense of how the Persians felt about Athens. The Ionian revolt was effectively crushed in 494 BCE, and the Persians wisely decided there was no point in burning down cities which they owned. Except Miletus, because screw those bastards. At Miletus, they sold all of the women and children into slavery, killed all the grown men, and castrated all the young men so no Miletus citizen could ever be born. For the other Ionian cities, they brought in tax reform, systems of arbitration to end local conflicts, and installed democratic governments. It was a sweet arrangement, and a lot of Greeks were happy living under it. They certainly thought it was better than getting their nuts lopped off. Turning their attention to Athens, in 491 BCE, the Persians offered every Greek city the same deal the Ionians had. They all pretty much took it, except Athens and Sparta. Athens and Sparta took the alternate route of murdering the Persian ambassadors, which is a dick move in just about anyone's book. The Persians invaded in 490 BCE, but defeated at the Battle of Marathon, where the Greeks cleverly attacked while the Persians were halfway through loading their army back onto their ships, saw the Persians withdraw back to modern-day Turkey. Darius died, and his son Xerxes, on becoming King of Kings of the Persian Empire, was determined to make a name for himself finishing his father's work in Greece. Meanwhile in Athens, one of the greatest admirals of history had gained political power and was building a fleet. Enter Themistocles. With the establishment of democratic government in Athens, as long as you were a Greek man owning property, a new breed of politician was rising. Harnessing the votes of the lower classes, they challenged the aristocratic families. First amongst these was Themistocles, general, administrator, admiral, ruler. Thucydides, no fan of democracy, wrote that Themistocles was a man who exhibited the most indubitable signs of genius. Indeed, in this particular, he has a claim on our admiration, quite extraordinary and unparalleled. While historians warn us against the concept of great men of history, favouring instead the idea that forces of history produce people whose names are recorded, Themistocles is one of those we can look at and wonder, how would this have gone if he hadn't been there? Throughout the Greco-Persian Wars, Themistocles was in the heart of things, planning, organising, fighting. The tragedy is that the Athenian aristocracy had the last laugh, and Themistocles' life ended in disgrace and exile after being ostracised in a public vote. In one of those twists of fate the ancient world did well, Themistocles ended up as the Persian governor of Magnesia, one of those pesky Ionian cities. There he became the first ruler in history to have his face used on coinage, something we're still doing today. He even got to be the hero of the less good 300 movie. All that rise and fall lives in the future. In the time we're looking at, he's in his prime, and building ships in Athens just as fast as he can, because the huge Persian army isn't going to be fed by horse-drawn wagons. They're going to have to be supplied by sea. 10 years after Marathon. The Persians, under Xerxes, invade Greece with a huge land army and a vast fleet to supply it. Greek sources put the Persian fleet at 1,207 ships, 1,207, which is suspiciously similar to the number of ships Homer said attacked Troy. The Greeks had around 270. Suffice to say, there were a lot of Persian ships, drawn from Phoenician cities and Egypt, Cyprus, Cilicia in Turkey, and Ionian Greeks. Lots and lots of Ionian Greeks fighting for the Persians now. Themistocles got the allied Greeks to agree on a plan. The army would try and hold the pass at Thermopylae. Yes, that Thermopylae. While the 300 Spartan hoplites were etching their names into history, less so the 6,000 or so other Greek soldiers who were actually there holding the hot gates from the 100,000 strong Persian horde, the Greek navies were making a fight that was just as important. If the Persian fleet could operate freely, then barring the road at Thermopylae was meaningless. They could easily be bypassed, outflanked, and surrounded. So the smaller and less experienced Greek fleet had to keep the Persians out of the Straits of Euboea for as long as the Spartans, and the 6,000 other guys no one cares about, could hold Thermopylae. To this end, they made camp at Cape Artemisium, where they could monitor movements either side of the island of Euboea and deny the Persian army the support, both for supply and for movement, of their fleet. Off Cape Artemisium, Herodotus was of the view that the Persian ships were better sailing vessels, and the Athenian crews were considered to be less experienced. On the other hand, the Greek ships were said to have been significantly heavier, which is a big advantage in a head-on-head ramming situation. Being heavier is, however, a liability in a turning fight to line up the ram. You have to build your ships to work within a doctrine. The Persian fleet was known to have mastered a maneuver called the diekplus, one where the enemy line is penetrated, and then the attacking ships make a hard wheel to get into the side of their enemy with their ram. To counter this, the Greeks were known to deploy their heaviest ships in a wheel formation, although there is significant reason to doubt they could have deployed 270 ships in this way. More likely they formed a defensive crescent in the straits, refusing their flanks. As the first day of the Battle of Thermopylae began, the Greek and Persian fleets came together late in the day, with the Persians coming off the worst before both sides disengaged. A storm that night smashed a fleet the Persians were trying to send around Euboea to outflank the Greek position. Worse was to befall the Persians that night. According to Pausanias, you heard that right, it isn't all Herodotus now. A woman called Hydna and her father swam out 10 miles through the stormy waters carrying big knives and cut the anchor ropes of numerous Persian ships, leading to their wreck in the tempest. It's a story so good it might have happened. Certainly ancient statues were made in Hydna's honour, so contemporaries thought there was something in it. On the second day, the Persians were occupied repairing the damage from the storm, but there was a great deal of skirmishing among scouting forces. On the third day, the Persians attempted to storm the strait and encircle the Greeks. The battle lasted all day with horrific losses on both sides. Herodotus informs us, "In that sea fight, of all Xerxes' fighters, the Egyptians bore themselves best. Besides other great feats of arms that they achieved, they took 5 Greek ships and their crews withal. Of the Greeks on that day, the Athenians bore themselves best, and of the Athenians, Clinias, son of Alcibiades. He brought to the war 200 men and a ship of his own, all at his private charges. The Greeks lost 100 ships, the Persians 400. So the Greeks won, right? Well, when you have 270 and you lose 100, you've got 170 left. You've lost a third of your force. On the other hand, if you have 1,200 ships and lose 400, you've got 800 left. Sure, you've also lost 1/3 of your force, but you've got 800 ships and they've only got 170. It's not a great situation to be taking heavy losses when you're the smaller force, no matter what shape the other guy is in. The Greeks were doing this exact same maths after the third day of the battle. Meanwhile, at Thermopylae, the Persians had found the path around the pass, and the Spartans, and probably some other dudes with less good publicists, had fought and lost their heroic stand. The Greek fleet had kept the Persians at bay for as long as it served any purpose. They withdrew to a place called Salamis we're going to talk about in the next episode, so you could claim it was a Persian victory. But the Greeks achieved their objectives. The army at Thermopylae might have been outflanked, but it was not outflanked by sea. As for the Persians, they had driven back the Greeks, forced the straits, and could continue to supply the army as it marched on Athens. Albeit at a high cost, they could make a credible claim to a complete victory. As he organised the retreat, Themistocles is said to have left a message at the springs he knew the Persians would be resupplying fresh water from. It was addressed to the Ionians and the Persian fleet. Men of Ionia, that what you are doing is not proper, campaigning against your fathers and wishing to enslave Greece. It would be best if you came on our side. But if this is not possible, at least during the battle stand aside and also beg the Carians to do the same with you. But if you cannot do either one or the other, if you are chained by higher force and you cannot defect during the operations, when we come at hand, act purposely, as cowards, remembering that we are of the same blood, and that the first cause of animosity with the barbarians came from you. That last is a very pointed reminder that it was the Ionians who started the whole damn war in the first place. While we can debate the meaning of the outcome, Persian victory, Greek victory, stalemate, the Battle of Artemisium gave the Greeks confidence that their ships, crews, and tactics could inflict significant damage on the Persians. And the survivors probably felt some sense of personal invincibility. The poet Pindar wrote of Artemisium that it was where the sons of the Athenians laid the shining foundation stone of freedom. More battles to come. We've got a lot of ground to cover as we take on every naval battle in history.